Hi, I'm Jen Lee from Red Thread Studio, and thanks for coming to check out my Sashiko demo. Sashiko is also referred to as Japanese embroidery when it's stitched through 2 layers of fabric, and Japanese quilting when you stitch it through 3 layers, or sometimes as well it's called big stitch quilting. I really like Sashiko because, well, 2 reasons. I like the aesthetic. It's very geometric in design, and it's very modern in my mind when it's married with vibrant colors of fabrics and threads. I also like it because it's portable, and I have 2 teenage kids, so I can take it with me when I'm heading off to volleyball practices and football practices as well. Like other needlework arts, Sashiko evolved out of necessity. The working class used it to extend the life of garments by reinforcing clothes and also improving the thermal qualities of the clothes, or they would recycle used clothes into other household objects. And so this was particularly important in a time when everything was very labor intensive. Things were hand spun, hand woven, hand dyed. And so you would see things being recycled and used again and again. For example, a garment may have turned into an apron or a bag, and then it would then in turn be recycled into a cleaning cloth, for example. Nowadays, we use it primarily for embellishing. We embellish our garments with Sashiko stitching. We use it for quilt blocks. There's just so many things you can use it for. So I wanted to show you a couple of samples of just different traditional Sashiko designs. And then we're going to talk about the things that you need to stitch Sashiko. And then I'm going to give you a quick video demo of how to actually do the stitch. So here we go. I'm just going to run through these here quickly for you to see. You can come check out redthreadstudio.com to see all of the panels that we have available to stitch. And I have to warn you, these are very addictive. It's quite an easy undertaking. It's basically a running stitch and easy to do, but I like that it's very meditative. You can be very social with Sashiko because not a lot of thought is required. You just get into your rhythm, and before you know it, you have stitched one and you're ready to do your next one. It's kind of like a potato chip. Once you start, it's hard to put it down. All right, so first up, we're going to talk about thread. Traditional Sashiko thread is made of long staple coarse cotton, very similar to a pearl cotton 5-weight or 8-weight. In fact, I also like to use Suspargo's pearl cotton eleganza. I like that it has a sheen on it, where traditional Sashiko thread has more of a matte finish. I also like the fact that you got lots of modern colors available, as well as variegated threads as well. And traditionally, Sashiko thread comes on a skein. So this is the Olympus brand, but now you can also get it on the cone. This is Lessing Cosmos Hidamari Sashiko threads. But for those of you who have used skeins of thread before, you know that they can quickly become a hot mess. So I'm going to give you a quick tip how I tame my threads, and then we'll come back and talk about everything else you need. So first you're going to take your skein of Sashiko thread. Typically the Olympus skein comes in a plastic wrapper. So first you're going to cut open the wrapper, and you want to make sure you do this gingerly so you don't cut the thread inside. Then you're going to pull the thread out of the plastic wrapper, and then you're going to slide the paper wrapping off the skein. You could also cut it as well, but you'd have to take care so as not to cut the thread. Then once you've taken the paper wrapper off, you're going to gingerly feel around to the place where the thread has been doubled up on itself. Once you find it, you're going to grab onto it, and then you're going to gently shake the skein, just like so, and you're going to get one continuous loop. Now what I like to do is I like to hold at the point where the thread wraps up on itself and go directly to the opposite end, and there I take my scissors and I'm going to cut through all of the layers of thread. Using the place where it's been doubled up on itself as a reference point, I'm going to kind of smooth it down, and then I'm going to grab 2 strands from either side. It really doesn't matter which side. And you're going to cut off 4 to 5 inches. You're going to use one of those pieces now, and then you're going to set the other to the side to use in a moment. Taking one of those pieces you've just cut, I go again back up to a place where I have the thread wrapped up on itself, and I'm going to tie on this small piece, and I usually tie it twice, tight but not too tight. And basically what this is going to do is create a handle for yourself or someone else to hold. So if you have someone in the house that can help you and hold on to this, otherwise you can put it under the foot of your pressing foot of your sewing machine. You could tie it onto a knob on a cabinet perhaps, or in this case today, we're just going to use some painter's tape to secure this skein of fabric down on the table while we go to the next step. Once you've secured the skein of thread on to your surface, you're going to divide it into roughly 3 equal sections. Doesn't have to be perfect, just more or less 3 sections of thread. And then once you've had a chance to pet it and admire it, you're going to go ahead and you're going to plait it or you're going to braid it. Now here, you don't want to braid it too tight, but not too loose either. I can tell usually who are type A personalities, their braided thread will be very, very tight. It's not the end of the world, but it certainly will make your life easier if you just have it sort of medium braided, again, not too tight, not too loose. And once you approach the end, you're going to take that other piece of thread that you had cut off previously and set to the side, and we're going to use that now to tie off the end of this, leaving anywhere from 1 to 3 inches as a tail. Again, tying it tight, but not too tight. I do that twice. And now you have a beautifully tamed skein of thread. And what's even better about this is now you can toss it in your sewing bag, take it with you on the go. When you're ready to stitch, you go back up to the top and you're going to grab 1 strand, and then you're going to gingerly pull, just like so, and voila. Here you're still going to have your managed thread, and on this side you're going to have roughly a 36-inch piece that you can now cut in half to have the recommended stitch length. And you're ready to stitch. Okay, now that you've tamed your threads, we're going to talk about fabric. Sashiko fabric was traditionally stitched on hand-dyed indigo, either cottons, linens, or other plant fibers. So anything with a plain weave will work. Natural fibers with lower thread counts, so something like prairie cloth or flannel work nicely. But I would highly recommend that you stay away from batiks. It's just too tightly woven, and you're going to become frustrated and put a lot of stress on your thread. Sashimomen, which is traditional Japanese Sashiko fabric, to me is very much like a hanky linen. And this is a pre-printed panel. I don't know if you can see the pre-printed lines on there, but essentially it comes like this. One side has the pre-printed panel and the other side is blank, and you can see it's very thin. You can see through it. And so lots of times folks like to stitch through 2 layers to help avoid puckering and for the lighter fabrics to avoid seeing your stitches on the back side. Now, as far as needles, Sashiko needles come in an assortment of sizes. I really like the Tulip brand needles. We have the long assorted and the short assorted. But you're going to, because the thread is bulky, the needle has to be able to pierce a hole in the fabric that's easy enough to pull 2 thicknesses of thread through, as well as the eye of the needle. So Sashiko needles tend to have a bigger eye. Again, they're accommodating threads like a 5-weight or a 8-weight pearl cotton. They have very sharp tips. They're long. This bad boy here is 2.5 inches long. And you could use, for example, an embroidery crewel needle or a darning needle as well if you don't already have these in your sewing box. Hidamari is needles that were recently released by Cosmo Lessian, so these are a nice addition to your sewing box as well. I'm also going to share with you 2 optional items that you can use when you're doing Sashiko stitching. One is the thimble. This leather thimble slides on your middle finger and rests right here. And basically the difference with Japanese Sashiko with American embroidery is instead of the stab method where you're moving the needle up and down, you're going to be moving the fabric onto the Sashiko needle, and then you're using the thimble to help push it through. From a personal preference, I don't generally use this, but many people do. There's also something called the kakahari, which is a third hand. It's a clamp that helps provide tension when you're doing straight stitching on a rather large piece. So no hoop required, but on occasion one might want to have some additional tension, and you could use a third hand or the kakahari to help. Now I'm going to take a moment and show you how I stitch.
Okay, but before we stitch, let's first talk about knots. So generally, I like to use a quilter's knot, and most of the work I'm doing, I'm going to be covering the back of my piece anyway, but that being said, I like to keep my knots on the outer edge of the piece where possible. For those of you who are not familiar with the quilter's knot, you'll thread your needle, then you'll take the tail end of the thread, and you'll face it towards the needle, kind of like they're kissing. I pinch it with my pointer finger and my thumb. On this hand, I wrap 2, maybe 3 times. I slide it down the shaft of the needle. I pinch with my finger and my thumb, and I pull it down. And voila, you have a knot. So to start stitching, I come up from the back side, where I would like to start at one end of the pre-printed dashed line. Come up and I just make sure it's snug, that the knot is pulled all the way taut to the fabric. And then this is where we begin to load stitches onto the needle, the fabric onto the needle. So I go down on the other end of the dash, and then I'm going to rock the fabric onto the needle, just like so. Now, the stitches here are already pre-printed on for you, which is a great way to practice. If you're doing it freeform, you'll want to have the stitch in the front twice the length of the stitch in the back. I just keep rocking the fabric onto the needle. This is why we do not need a hoop, because you need the fabric to be flexible. And then I'll stop to go ahead, pull the thread through, make sure that we don't have any puckering, and from here I'll continue on. For beginners, I recommend doing 3, maybe 4 stitches at a time before you pull it through until you start to feel comfortable with the amount of fabric that you would like to load onto your piece. And I'm going to do a few more stitches here for you to see, and then I'm going to show you how I end it on the back side of the fabric. So when I've come to the end of my stitching line or I've run out of thread, I will take the needle to the back. So I'll go ahead and pull this line through. Make sure there's no puckers. Now on the back side, let's pretend that I was going to finish. I'll go to the previous stitch, go under that stitch with my needle, come back around one more time. And now this time, before I completely pull the thread through, I'll go back and put the eye of my needle through that loop I've just created, pull it tight. Sometimes I'll just come back and do it for a second time, like so, and then I'll stitch. I'll snip that, and voila. So there you have it. The beauty is in the simplicity of Sashiko stitching.
Thanks for listening. You can email us with any questions at info@redthreadstudio.com, or you can tag us on Facebook or Instagram with the photos of your Sashiko makes at Red Thread Studio Online.